This moment in front of you feels a lot like the very first time I met Steve Jobs. It was somewhat daunting and somewhat exhilarating at the same time. Now, I wish I could tell you that the story went really well and the meeting was highly successful, but it was not. In fact, the very first words that Steve Jobs said to me was a swear word. And I'm going to tell you what it is. The reason that he had come back from the Exodus was to save Apple. That was his job. My job in that moment was to present the entire business review of my product team. And so there was a lot riding on that particular moment. And behind me, on some really big slides, sort of like what might be behind me right now, was something that said channel manager or channel development manager. And so the very first words that Steve Jobs says to me was not hi or moi. It was not, hey, how do you say your name? Which I would have hoped he might have wanted to know, because I was sort of hoping to impress him right about then, which, by the way, is Nilofer. No, these were the very first words that Steve Jobs said to me, and I apologize for the vernacular. But his words are so instructive for how business is going to work today that I'm going to go ahead and use his language. So remember, the slide says channel manager, and Steve Jobs' first words to me were, fuck the channel. And I looked over my team that had been, we had been working for weeks to get our action plan together. And so I looked over at them sort of like in the corner, like, what do I do now? And they looked back equally like, back. And so I proceeded on, hoping that somehow magic would happen and I would impress him. But it didn't really seem to sway him at all, what it was that we presented. The reason I was the one pulling together this business plan, I was all of 20-something years old, it was 1997, was that the product team I had been in charge of had grown from $2 million to $180 million in 18 months. It was by far the most profitable part of the company at the time. Every other product line was declining, both in revenues and in profit, and ours was growing in both. So I expected the moment to be, good, but not so much. And in fact, I ended up finishing the presentation sort of like, I'll say it as assuredly as I possibly can, and then run out of the room and hope somehow it will get better. In fact, I actually went back to my office and typed a little note back to someone who had offered me a job somewhere else. Because I was like, yes, that does seem like a very good idea right now. And about a year later, I ran into the colleague who had taken over my role. And I expected to offer condolences, like, oh, you must have gotten a new job, or you must be looking for a new job, and how can I help? And instead, he said, actually, we're doing great. We're doing everything that you set out in the plan. It's going fantastically. And here's where I learned that leaders need to hold two things as true. They need to both run towards the future and figure out how to let us let go of what we're currently doing well, but also manage the day-to-day. It's such a complex thing to manage a business because you have to figure out how to both invent and hold true. And never more so is that true than today.